Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of the One Hood Power Hour. We were gone for a couple weeks, but we are back in effect tonight, or at least 2/3 of us are. Our co-host Kahari is enjoying his vacation right now, but he'll be back with y'all next week. But yeah, so we're back after a couple weeks. Obviously, a ton has happened since then. We'll be joined by a couple great guests tonight to talk about two really recent occurrences. First of all, we'll be speaking with Chris Potter to talk about a couple different things, but especially the Pennsylvania census data that was just released, and a bunch of the different potential implications of that information. And then later on in the show, we'll also be joined by Sadaf Delawar to talk about the ongoing crisis as it unfolds in Afghanistan, and her perspective on that as well. So like I mentioned, it's been a couple weeks. A ton of things have happened since then, so I'll pass it off to Miracle to open it up with some hot takes, and I'll follow up with a couple of my own as well.
Yes, it's been a very interesting couple of weeks. I think everybody's mind right now are on the people of Afghanistan and watching some of the images. We're not going to play them for you this evening. We are not going to play them for you this evening because we want to make sure that everyone is, engaged, and it is not going to be traumatized from listening and hearing some of the conversations that are going on. But we are very thankful and aware for this, these conversations we're about to have. In addition, we know COVID-19 crisis is still occurring here in Allegheny County. We also know that the local school district has had to push, the start of school back for a couple of weeks for a variety of reasons. One being that there's not enough bus drivers, which is kind of taking a lot of people are taken aback by this. Even the local mayor has said, look, transportation is something that the school has known about, is what the city organizers and planners have known about, so this shouldn't be an issue. And so that's some of the things that are going on locally. And again, these COVID-19 numbers are skyrocketing. The Delta variant is something that people have to take seriously. A lot of places like in Mississippi are really at capacity for what's going on. And so we really need people to wear their masks. We need people to get vaccinated and take serious precautions, because schools are starting across the country. And as such, high schools, colleges, everybody is going to be out when schools start back. A lot of schools are also in person, so they're not doing stuff virtual. Locally, the schools have not required vaccines. One of our sister schools, Temple, has required people to get vaccinated in order to come to the in-person classes. However, that is not the same across the board. And so one of the things we're going to be looking at in the next 2 weeks, what's going to happen with these COVID-19 Delta variant numbers. There have been some schools that already started that actually have already gone to virtual because the outbreaks have been so intense in such a small amount of time. And there's been a lot of issues, a lot of different long haulers, children now who weren't accessible to the previous variants are actually unfortunately passing away and in hospital stays for weeks at a time. And so we really need to be paying attention to what's going on. Additionally, we're still looking at what's going to be happening statewide. The governor here in Pennsylvania did say that they are going to encourage and ask and request local universities to give out the vaccine. So that's going to be rolling out in the next week or two. When we're looking at that, a lot of hospitals are also unfortunately running out of the COVID-19 treatments. And so they're really staggering the people that they can help. They're telling people not to come. So we're even in a situation that we were not in March of 2020, where hospitals are actively telling people not to come because they do not have the supplies and the space to treat people. They don't even have the places to refer people to. So again, we have to keep our eyes out on the Delta variant. In addition, today, there's still conversations about the next election. We did see this weekend pass by without a change in presidential leadership. Again, this weekend was one of the days that, Q believers had hoped would see a change in presidential leadership. That has not happened. And so we still have to be mindful and aware that there are people who do not believe in these current election results, who are organizing and planning and creating their own forms of resistance and engaging these elections, including people who have been known to be armed and been known to take up acts of violence against the government. So that's something that people still need to be mindful of as we're into this new fall election season, which we'll talk more about at the end of this evening. And another thing people need to be mindful of, which a lot of people have been very excited about, is that the federal government did delay requiring people to pay their interest or their student loan payments. It's still been delayed. We have not had student loan forgiveness yet in this country. They just keep delaying and forgiving the payments. And so a lot of people are organizing still around getting all federal student loans canceled or forgiven. As a reminder, this does not, of course, impact people who have private loans who are still being required, even through this pandemic, to pay them down. So there's a lot of things that are happening policy-wise, even though our Congress locally and nationally are on summer recession and don't come back for a couple more weeks. There's still a lot of changes that are happening that people just need to be mindful of. And I'll switch over to Ryan to give us his hot takes before we head over to talk to Chris.
Absolutely. Thanks, Miracle. So I had a quick technical difficulties, so I had to jump out for a second. So hopefully I don't just, reiterate some of the stuff you already covered. So, a couple recent developments. The Pennsylvania Senate race has, of course, gotten more crowded, with Connor Lamb declaring that he's going to be running for that seat as well. And Chris Potter, our guest tonight, has written about that as well. So I'm sure we'll probably touch on that at some point as well. However, at the same time, the Pittsburgh mayoral race has actually gotten less crowded, with Marlon Woods officially dropping out of the race. So, I mean, it was already pretty presumptive that, Gainey was going to win that race to begin with. But, still an interesting development there. And, in local politics, or I guess statewide politics, where I'm based as of a week ago, now that I've moved up to New York, I moved up here and had a new governor for about 4 hours until he resigned, sort of, although is still in office for now, technically, and is supposed to be stepping down in a few days. So we'll see how that officially unfolds, as he's already announced his resignation, but continues to make pretty substantial policy decisions still, especially as it pertains to COVID with different mandates related to masks and vaccinations. As the Delta variant continues to, pose an even higher threat in various areas, New York included, Pittsburgh and Allegheny County included. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the next few months as well.
Yeah, and I think that is a very interesting case study, because he resigned, but he said, I'm quitting in 2 weeks. So he gets to have his transition team go through, but we don't necessarily know what the next steps are. We don't know if he's going to be facing any criminal charges. Those have not been announced as of yet. But again, remind people that he is resigning because, the state Attorney General of New York found that he not only engaged in a pattern of sexual harassment, but created a hostile work environment in conjunction with these behaviors, some to cover up the behaviors, but also to kind of, create a presence of fear so that people wouldn't question his politics or his actions. So it's very important that people do, still follow along and understand that, Me Too is not a political situation. A lot of people in leadership, regardless of their political ideologies or affiliations, are unfortunately using their positions of power to take advantage of other people, particularly, marginalized workers. And that's something we have to be very mindful of. But I'm going to switch it back over to Ryan so he can introduce our next guest and we can just talk about some of the changes that we're seeing here in Allegheny County.
Yeah, thanks, Miracle. And just, following up on that one point again, really quick, assuming he does step down in, I believe it's either 6 or 8 days at this point from when he's supposed to officially step down. There still hasn't been like a letter of resignation or anything, but, assuming that goes through, hopefully that'll be really impactful in setting and reinforcing the precedent, that, these type of offenses, that type of behavior is, kind of a no exception situation as far as, having to step down from or be removed from, public office. And, like you said, I believe the actual criminal investigation is still pending or ongoing. So, regardless of what the outcome of that will be, which, is much more to be determined, hopefully it can still set that precedent as far as holding elected office goes. But yeah, and then on that note, we can go ahead and transition into our first guest, who I mentioned at the top of the show is going to be Chris Potter from WESA. He's going to be joining us again tonight. Fortunate to be joined by him for, I believe, the 3rd or 4th time, at least since I've been on the show last year. But he's going to be talking to us about a couple recent developments. First and foremost, the recently released census data.
Hi. I got to straighten out my glasses in that photograph. They're kind of like that before.
Good. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I am all right, and it's exciting times in Allegheny County, obviously, because this is the first time since 1960 that the county actually gained population, which I think a lot of people weren't expecting to have happen. The prediction that, they kind of do estimates, and the estimates for the county was that it was going to lose a percentage point or two of population, and it actually added about 27,000 people. So big news, and that's not unusual nationwide. It seems as though a lot of the big, and not that Pittsburgh is a big metro area, but a lot of the places that already had people got a lot more, and a lot of other places shrunk. Most counties in the country shrunk. Most counties in Pennsylvania did, about 2/3 of them. But Allegheny grew, and so did Butler a little bit. So did Washington, and Philly in those areas grew huge. And that's going to have a huge effect on politics and my life for the next few years anyway.
So as you mentioned, right at the beginning, this was the first time since 1960 that the county population has increased. Which was a surprise to a lot of people. Do you think that's, just generally falling in line with that trend you mentioned where, more and more people are consolidating in major and mid-sized metro areas? Or do you think were other specific factors that kind of, drove that growth?
Yeah, I think it's part of the trend. I also think that, if you look at the numbers, I think Allegheny County grew by about 27,000 people. The population of people identifying as Asian alone grew by about 24,000. So, you could kind of say that like the growth in this county was driven almost entirely by that particular increase. And generally, I think what we saw here, and this is true in a lot of other places too, is that the real growth is coming from any non-white sort of sector of the population. And so places that, one could argue or debate how welcoming Pittsburgh is to the immigrant community, of course, but I suspect it shapes up pretty well compared to, say, Cambria County, which lost more than 10,000 people. Places that are attracting those people are doing well. And these aren't new trends. I had people telling me, 5-10 years ago, that, they were seen, especially in suburban communities in the North Hills. And there were people who were sort of hoping that, Democrats in particular could, win Mike Terzai's old seat up in like McCandless and Bradford Woods in that area because of the influx of, especially in those communities, pretty highly educated folks of Asian descent. And, it didn't turn out, and it still hasn't turned out, but I think the trend is inarguable. And I think that that's what's driving it, sort of at least on the county-wide level. And we can kind of go down into sort of individual municipalities because the stories can be very different there.
I mean, yes, and you're talking about there is no to juxtapose the city and the county. The city has shrunk some of its Black population, but again, other people are still moving in. A part of that is the affordability of of the area. There is like the infrastructure. There are a lot of the tech jobs here in the area. Of course, we do have the universities and people deciding to stay. But because we've gained this many people, have you heard about any changes of what it means, particularly with the reduction of we're still losing a seat nationally. But have you heard any discussions about, the changing of the map? That's still, those ongoing conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't heard directly from anybody who says this means X or Y, but I would say this: everybody has known, first of all, that Pennsylvania was going to lose, as you pointed out, Miracle, a congressional seat. We're going to go from 18 to 17. I mean, Pennsylvania did gain a little bit of population. We got over 13 million, but that's lags the rate of increase nationwide in other states. So even though we gained a little bit, we kind of lost ground. So we'll go to 17 districts. Everybody has known all along that the western part of the state has been shrinking while the east has been growing. So we know that that seat is going to kind of come out from those places. What's, I think, interesting, what has interesting implications, I think, is that Allegheny County did not shrink and in fact grew. So there was a lot of talk specifically about like the Connor Lamb seat, which is sort of suburban, North Hills, South Hills of, around Pittsburgh, suburban Allegheny, and as well as Beaver and a little sliver of Butler County. That seat may change a little less. Where you really see the shrinking is in the sort of more rural western Pennsylvania seats, and particularly the seats held by Fred Keller and G.T. Thompson. These are both rural Republicans whose congressional districts are like the size of some Central European nations. I mean, they're big. I mean, they're really big if you just look at them on the map. Those two guys, their districts, if you look at like the top 25 slowest growing / fastest shrinking districts in the United States of America, both those guys are on that list of 25. So in a sane world, I suppose one would expect those seats to really be crunched or whatever, right? But redistricting is a political process, and we will have to kind of see how that plays out. But I would say generally, a lot of the, when we kind of look at the state legislative level, clearly, Philadelphia is going to gain a seat. There's going to be some movement there, but that may be coming a little less from Allegheny County than I would have thought, if you'd asked me like a month ago or 2 weeks ago. So I do think that it'll have some interesting potential implications there.
And then, kind of moving from countywide to citywide, you talked about in your article how, Pittsburgh's overall population declined very slightly, but didn't really change too drastically one way or the other. However, despite that minor overall change, there were still some pretty, drastic shifts otherwise within that overall population. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious thing, and I think it's obvious because a lot of us have been talking about it, and just sort of anecdotally, our impression is what we saw was a big time loss in the city's Black population, more than 10,000 people. I think you're talking to an English major here, so bear with me. I think it was about 13% or something like that of the Black population, which now numbers about 69,000 people. It was 79,000 in 2010. And a lot of those folks have simply moved out. And from what we can kind of tell, they mostly moved not very far away to a lot of places where I think we all, again, kind of anecdotally knew they were going. Penn Hills, the Black population in Penn Hills grew by a couple of thousand people. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and guess a lot of those folks just kind of came, across the city line there. In fact, interestingly, I was trying to find what other municipalities in Allegheny County lost Black population in the past decade. And I could only find a handful. And they were all places where the Black population had previously been in the double digits or less. So, if you were Hampton Township and you had 9 Black residents, and now in this new census you have like 6, that's a 33% decline. Nobody else had that kind of loss. It's actually really conspicuous when you just kind of look through it. Even places that Upper St. Clair, a few hundred Black people grew. I think that population grew by about a third or whatever. So clearly for the city, that has been a big story. And as Miracle said earlier, clearly there are people who are being displaced from communities, from neighborhoods there. It was a huge debate, as I think we discussed maybe the last time I was here, in the mayor's race. How many, because, Bill Peduto would say there are a lot of places where Black families are simply choosing to leave for better schools or more safe communities, which I thought was sort of a hell of a thing for a mayor to sort of that's your argument? Is there just leaving by choice and that's supposed to make people feel better? But that was the debate that we had at that time. And I think going forward, first of all, there's obviously the implication about what to do about that from a policy standpoint. And we do have this mayoral election coming up. As you said, Ryan, Marlon Woods is out. I expect there's another independent candidate, Will Parker, whose petitions have also been challenged. That challenge is going on, maybe not as we speak, but it's happening this week. I would not at all be surprised if he was kicked off the ballot as well. There are a lot of challenges, and some of them are pretty serious. So we'll still have this debate with Tony Moreno and Ed Gainey, but more broadly, there is this issue of how do we draw the city council district lines, and that's a big question because the Black population in Pittsburgh now is about 22%. If you could get to 2 of the 9 city council districts, which is typically what we've done, it's what we have now, it's what we've had for a long time, that would be roughly proportional. That would be pretty close. The problem is that Black population hasn't just shrunk overall, it's also sort of distributed itself a little differently in the city. So it will be pretty hard to draw a second majority Black district. And it'll sort of be an interesting debate about how hard we should try, because, there's an argument that says maybe it's actually the better thing to have a couple of districts where your Black population, maybe they're not an outright majority, but they're still enough to really be sort of a power center within that district. Maybe you don't have to settle for 2 highly concentrated districts. Maybe you got one that's concentrated in 2 others where the Black vote can't be ignored. And I think that's a big thing. Pittsburgh used to elect all 9 of its city councilors citywide. They just all were supposed to represent the whole city, and they all ended up coming from Squirrel Hill and Shady Side. This was a setting up by district was a way to change that. And as part of that, there was this effort to say, let's really draw districts to ensure this kind of representation. But, a lot of Democratic voters did just vote for a Black mayor, including a lot of those white voters. Maybe we're on the cusp of something. Maybe this city is in a different place than it was 30 or 40 years ago. I don't know yet, but that's, I think, the debate that's coming.
Yeah, and with that is also this idea of what do we do with, you said, that our increasing Asian populations, as well as our Latino Hispanic population, who, for a long time has been really largely ignored, and still has really had to go and create political power, because you also have to think about, these districts. A lot of, Hispanic people have been pushed out to the Beachview areas for a variety, of reasons. And then we have various enclaves. So what does it mean to really have this multicultural city council or multicultural county council? Because of affordability and opportunity, everyone's going to be spread out. So I think you raised some really interesting points. And I also wanted to ask you touched a little bit about the mayoral race, but can you just talk about the challenges and what's ahead, and when do all these challenges need to be submitted by, so that we can actually have a ballot, because the November election is really right around the corner.
Right. So what the nature of these challenges is whether you're running as a Democrat or Republican or as an independent, you have to get a certain number of petitions signed by people who are registered voters in the area. And what happens is you do that, you turn in your petitions or your papers, and then the world has a week to look them over and say, did the people who signed these petitions, are they registered voters in the city or the area that they're actually running to represent? Are these actually their signatures? Did the candidate do what they were supposed to do in terms of disclosing financial and other information? Marlon Woods and Will Parker were both challenged. Mr. Woods was challenged based on some financial disclosure stuff. I think he probably would have been okay on that. But then there were what we call line by line challenges. And these are kind of like, this person isn't a registered voter. This person doesn't actually live in this address. This person is, and this could be a grueling process. It can take hours and hours and days. Mr. Woods over the weekend decided not to fight it and basically to withdraw, because he said we just don't have the resources to prove our case. Mr. Parker is continuing to fight. He's representing himself in this action. Basically trying to argue that the people who signed the petitions are really those people. I'm not a handwriting expert nor a lawyer. I can just tell you that I've looked at a lot of petitions in my day, and some of these are not great. But it will take time. It can take hours and hours and hours and hours to do this stuff, because you have to like compare the signature on the petition to what is on file with the county's voter registration office. So it'll probably take a couple. I would guess at this point, just sort of based on what I heard about the pacing, it could take a couple days. And at that point, he's the last one. So if he's removed, then it's really just a 2-person race with Mr. Moreno and Mr. Gainey.
Yeah, I think it's very important for people to understand when you are running for office. And I know we did a conversation about how to build your own table. We'll probably do it again. That is very important that not only the signatures match, but that registered voters in those precincts are the only people who are collecting signatures, because one of the challenges could be that the person who collected the signature was did not meet the requirements, and therefore every signature page that person collected or interacted with is now invalid. And so it always reminds me of these civics classes of like when you were, I don't know, I think I did my civics class in like 9th grade and 12th grade because we had 2. But like people always have to like go back and be like, what are the requirements again? Like, can we do this in a democracy? People are, it's like, I think our civic studies teachers would be like so proud that we're always, the one thing we always talk about, like, we don't need this stuff when we grow up. And it's like, the one thing you are always going to need is like your civic education.
Right. And I mean, look, there's a spirited argument about whether these requirements are unfair. Especially when it comes to independent candidates, because the burden for getting on the ballot as an independent is higher. You need more signatures than the burden to be on the Democratic or the Republican major party ticket. The rationale for that is Democrats and Republicans still have to vote for you. I mean, you get on the ballot, but then you still have to win that primary before you can get onto the ballot in November. So you kind of have to jump a couple hoops there. So maybe it makes sense to hold independent candidates to a higher standard. I get that. But there are people who kind of think like the system should err on the side of giving voters more choices. And that's a debate that's been going on for as long as I've been reporting, and I don't expect to end regardless of how these challenges turn out.
Yeah, and then real quick before we let you go and move on to our next guest, I did just want to ask, now that we have Connor Lamb has officially entered the race, just ask a little bit about that, where he kind of fits into the overall landscape as far as the primary goes, if there's any particular candidates who might be hurt or helped by him entering and kind of splitting up the votes. Just any other general updates related to that election.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. And a lot of the people I talk to just feel like this party right now is there's so many currents and cross currents within it, right? I mean, I think you'd have to say that in general, Lamb is further towards the center, more to the right, however you want to put it, than the field as it existed generally. I mean, obviously you're talking about Malcolm Kenyatta, the state rep from Philadelphia, John Fetterman, former Braddock mayor, lieutenant governor, both pretty much on the sort of left end of the spectrum for Democrats. Valar Kush from Montgomery County, probably between Lamb and the other two somewhere. So he's more conservative in a lot of ways, although he's been a pretty steady vote for Democrats, certainly in his most recent term. I don't know that it's easy to say who's hurt or helped by him quite yet. I mean, the most obvious thing is that both he and Fetterman come from Allegheny County. They both have that Western Pennsylvania kind of thing. And that can matter a lot. It's an old truism, but it's kind of a cliche, but it's often true that Western Pennsylvania will vote for Western Pennsylvania candidates. There's a sort of loyalty there. Even if you don't live in Allegheny County, you'll vote for somebody, if you're in Westmoreland, you'll vote for them before you vote for somebody in Philadelphia or Montgomery, somewhere far to the east. So to the extent that that's an advantage, they would sort of be splitting that advantage. I don't know. I mean, one of the things I will say for a fact is that Connor Lamb's kickoff had more elected officials showing up and endorsing him than John Fetterman will probably get during the entire course of his campaign. And I think that's because Fetterman sort of wants it that way. And I think it's because Connor Lamb has tended to those relationships a lot more assiduously than he has. So, I think he's going to continue to be that guy that people know and are sometimes frustrated by, right? A very pro-labor Democrat. He's going to vote with the party most of the time, the vast majority of the time, but there are going to be some key issues where I think he just really ticks Democrats off. The argument for him is that he's electable in a November election. I mean, that's what it boils down to. That is the message. It's almost the first thing that Rich Fitzgerald said when he introduced him. It's almost the first thing that you hear, like in Connor Lamb's ad, is like, I'm basically an electability message. And, the argument of that campaign is if you look around, people thought that Joe Biden couldn't win Pennsylvania because we need somebody further to the left of Joe Biden. That obviously didn't turn out. There's an argument about how the Nina Turner race turned out in Ohio, that maybe Democrats aren't quite as progressive as they're sometimes billed to be. I don't know. That's, I guess, what we're going to find out. And that's sort of the big test, I think, for the party, is just sort of like, what direction does this Democratic electorate want to go? And that'll be the debate. And we'll see it. It may get, my colleague Julian Routh in the Post-Gazette had a story a few days ago that just kind of said, this race may be decided in some communities that we don't usually think of as deciding Democratic primaries very often. Because if you've got two candidates from the Philadelphia area and two candidates from Allegheny County, and they both divide up their kind of bases, maybe the race gets decided in places like Erie or in a lot of other kind of smaller Democratic places. We'll have to see that play out. It's a very mixed, fluid situation. And I think that is part of what made it an appealing situation for Connor Lamb to jump into.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. We're going to be tuned to so many things happening here in Pennsylvania for the next, I think, 3 years, because
we're all stuck with each other. Yeah.
We have so many elections. I don't think people realize so many major elections happening back to back before we even get to the presidential election again. So it's always a pleasure to have you. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. It's always good to be with you.
Yep. Thanks for joining us.
And so we are going to move on to our next guest. And again, I'll put out, a general trigger warning, and also remind people that one of the beliefs and foundational principles that we have here is that we believe that impacted people should be the ones telling their stories and sharing their experiences. And we know over the past, week, there has been a lot of conversation about Afghanistan and what's going on and what people can do. And there's been a lot of reactionary, of course, conversation on this topic. And we were very fortunate enough a couple of years ago to meet this amazing next guest as a Coral Fellow who was working with RC3, One Hood Media, and who is from Afghanistan, and is a person who's always talked about her country and what it meant to be here and to talk to different people from different experiences, talking about experiences of refugees, talking about other people from conflict. And so we wanted to bring Sadaf on just to talk about what's going on, what we should know, what should we be understanding, the language that we should be using. And again, we are not going to be showing and sensationalizing anyone's harm or anyone's death, because we don't believe that is necessary to get you to care about people, because you should just be doing that regardless. And so we want to welcome Sadaf to the program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that awesome introduction. Hi, Miracle. Hi, Ryan. I missed you too. It has been really difficult. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah. I think that I will say I appreciate One Hood solidarity in a lot of the issues that are going on around the world. And I appreciate you reaching out and talking to me about this because I think, as I've gone on to notice, unfortunately, when people advocate for Palestine, when people advocate for other areas, especially in the Muslim world, there does not seem to be that much understanding or advocacy on behalf of Afghans. And, not that I'm bitter about it, not that I'm angry about it, but I think it's just a basic human rights issue. And I think like people not recognizing human rights issues that are going on is a major issue. It's, you don't have to be Muslim, you don't have to be Afghan to care about the fact that the US has done a grave injustice in the process and in the way in which they pulled out. And I think that is what is at the core of what's going on, because we are anti-colonial, anti-imperialist. Afghans are, by history, as I have studied it, nomads. And so we have not necessarily been a people that have really rallied around this, like the formal structures of governance. That has never been historically a progression of Afghan like history. It's been introduced via colonial powers, right? And so like with that said, there's been a lot of involvement. First and foremost, because Afghanistan borders 6 different countries. Afghanistan is the playground for proxy wars, has been for a very long time. And since in the last 50 years with the Soviet invasion, Afghanistan has been the playground and the area for all proxy wars at this point. And it's just been really devastating. And by the way, anything that I share and anything that I say is not because I speak for all Afghan people. I do not. It's based on the history that I've studied. I'm a current UCSB master's student, and I'm studying Afghan refugee crises and the ongoing chronic crises that's going on. That's essentially what my thesis is about. Unfortunately, it's very timely for me to be studying this, but at the same time, there's a lot of history that I've been learning and reviewing, and mainly history written by white men, but really that's all I have access to. But regardless, it is history that kind of informs me on what is going on and how US foreign policy essentially, I broke my pen because I'm so angry, has essentially, led up to this moment. It's always been what has culminated currently. And the speech that Biden made today was really telling and really disgusting. Just about one of the most vile speeches I've heard in a while. Nothing surprises me, I will say, but that speech did surprise me, especially the harm reductionist voters that came at me and were, advocating for this administration. Really, whether it was this one or Trump, what happened in Afghanistan was this was going to happen. There was never going to be any difference in Afghanistan in terms of what has happened, because the US's entire foreign policy was going to end in this manner, to leave Afghans with nothing, essentially.
And again, not to get too involved in what is going on, but can you just get for our viewers just a general synopsis of what has happened in the past 72 hours in Afghanistan? And there's been a lot of conversation, particularly about, women and girls in Afghanistan. Is there any ways that people should be supporting right now?
Yeah, so in the last week, province after province after province was falling. But what was happening was as reports, because I have family there and I am in direct contact with a lot of people. The ANDSF, which is the Afghan National Defense Force, was told not to fight in certain provinces by Ashraf Ghani, which was the president. The president was essentially handing every province to the Taliban, slowly but surely. And so that's what the process was like, according to what I have come to understand, what I know from people who are part of the ANDSF, and they have said that they were told to not even bother fighting, to just peacefully give every province. So when Biden made this initial claim, especially today, and stated that, the Afghan people did not fight for themselves, it was, Ghani was told by the US to deliver power, essentially, to give every single province away. And so that's why it happened so fast. There was essentially in many provinces not like one bullet fired because the NDSF was told to stand down. And so as that happened, all the provinces came under the control of the Taliban. They, on Sunday, took Kabul and the capital. And, the Taliban has been on this for the last few years on this campaign. What they do is they take a lot of the aid that is being handed down, and Ashraf Ghani has been doing this, which was the president who left. It's his own thing, but he essentially was, handling out a lot of money. There was a lot of backroom deals, and he was essentially giving all of this power to the Taliban. This was in the process for months. Everyone knew this was going to happen, at least those at the top. But what this ends up meaning is, while it is a major talking point for especially the West, concerning themselves with specifically Afghan women and girls, and that seems to be as if the entire war was for Afghan girls and women. It was not. It was an imperialist colonial project. It was not at all for the freedom of Afghan people, especially not the women and children. Never was. But with that said, what's happening is that's the point that people are most interested about, and the point that everyone harps on. But the larger picture, in my opinion, is missing, which is that the United States funded and created the Taliban. They created the Taliban. In addition, the Taliban, and to many Afghans here, especially those that live in the US, we, as I've been talking, we feel like our identity is lost, like our country is lost, because the Taliban are not Afghan in any sense. They are not. They do not speak Farsi. Their Pashto is a completely different dialect, more Pakistani Pashto. And also the Taliban in the last few years was funded by the US and the Pakistani government. And so essentially it's like if, I don't know, I can't name a country that would ever come and take the US, right? Because that's never something we can ever think of, because that's not possible. But it's essentially Mexico coming and taking over everything. And it's just the American people. I mean, America doesn't necessarily have one monolithic identity like most nations do, but if they did, that's what it would be like. And it makes all of us here lose our identity and lose our sense of, not that this is happening for everyone, but for me anyway, it makes me numb. It makes me realize that the struggles, the women, of course, the women were already also not necessarily there was no outright large freedom under the US NATO control either. Let's be real, it wasn't women were walking around in skirts in the 1970s, those pictures that they're showing constantly. That wasn't happening. But women have said, at least for my family, we're used to wearing the burqa. We're used to being under surveillance and control. That has not necessarily changed under the Taliban. Yes, people were obtaining more education, and that is the loss that is really being considered. But the greater loss is that the country belongs to an entirely other nation and an entirely other group of people that is antithetical to the Afghan identity and the Afghan values and identity, essentially. They're not Afghan in any sense of the word. So it's just foreign people coming and taking your government, foreign people that are then wearing your traditional clothing and saying they are one of you when they are not. It does not make any sense. Everyone's confused. if you throw on a sombrero, it doesn't make you Mexican, or, like you can't just throw on any traditional, like you can't wear Native American garb and call yourself Native American. But that's what's happening in Afghanistan, is that these people who are not, Afghan, are throwing on the pakol and the perontumban, which is like the attire, and calling themselves Afghan. And it's bizarre, but at the same time, the world doesn't know the difference, right? And so they go, oh, it's a civil war. Biden said it's a civil war. It is not. It's an imperialist, colonial type of war, because you created them, you brought them here. It's another country controlling them, funding them. It's not Afghan at all. Everyone is confused because they're like, is the language going to change now? What's going to happen? Because they don't speak Farsi, in the national language, or Dari, should I say. The national language is Dari, and they don't speak it. So the greater thing is, when they implement these rules, these policies, this new nation building, whatever they're going to do, it's going to be completely different than what Afghan people have known for thousands of years.
And I guess the sign of the times is that there have been some people from the Taliban who've taken on social media and have been having like these conversations. I guess if you're going to do like a hostile takeover of a country, with the backing of the West, nothing gives you, cover than to have like social media, kind of, which has been very, very weird, especially in like chat rooms. Have you been, not you personally, but has there been a conversation about like how these dialogues are happening and what their purpose is going to be for people? Because, the Taliban said, oh, we're going to protect and we're going to support women's rights. This is not the same Taliban that was there prior to, the American invasion. And a lot of these people, like you're saying, these are younger men from different countries, some from Guantanamo, who've all kind of like come together, expats of different areas to now like take over. So what are these conversations like looking like? And is that even creating more fear, knowing that like this once terroristic organization is able to like broadcast like on social media, like their intentions and their next steps?
Yeah. There are those who support the Taliban, those who are of the community who are sitting in the West advocating for Sharia, which also the Taliban are not practicing Sharia. Sorry, I have all my friends are checking up on me. I'm not sure if that stuff is popping up, but I have like notifications popping up constantly. Oh, okay, good. But yeah, my friends are checking in on me all the time because it's just been so horrible. But yeah, the conversations are really, really dissected. One of the issues is sanction Pakistan. And that has been a major cry and issue that Afghans have asked for years. And even this was something that Trump has even advocated for and has even said, which was like the only thing I've ever agreed with on the issue with Trump. But it makes a lot of sense. And I think like then the discourse is like Pakistan and Afghanistan have always had this like rivalistic relationship. And there's been a lot of issues because, what's going, like people think that in asking for sanctioned Pakistan, people are thinking that it's asking to be against Pakistan and or be racist or whatever other, things. And that actually does happen, I will admit. But the larger conversation is, amongst certain groups of Afghans is that sanctioning Pakistan means cutting off the funds and supplies that are coming in through Pakistan, have been coming in through there for years to come. The next is, like I said, there are so many who support the Taliban while living in the West because they support Sharia, which is, like I said, a form of Islamic law that is actually not at all being correctly practiced by the Taliban to begin with. But at the same time, like that is something that is being advocated for. And it's advocated for people who are conservative or religious, but living in the West. And it's like, those conversations are very, very frustrating because it's like, you live in the West. If you really believe in this, why don't you take a plane ticket and go on back? You love Sharia, you love what they're standing for, then like go stand and live with the Taliban. Like if that is your stance, then that's what you should do. And those conversations are always happening. But then the larger conversation, there's others obviously that are really concerned about women. And then there are other factions that really are frustrated, like me, who are anti-colonialist. I never wanted the US there. I never wanted them for 20 years. But at the same time, the way in which the US left is akin to, nonprofit organizations or those who are advocating and saying they're like, let's say they want to go and feed people who are houseless and doing so. And then all of a sudden being like, I'm going to get out the truck. I have a bunch of food with me, but oh no, it's chilly outside. Actually, never mind. I'm going to get back in my car and drive away with the food and everything because it's chilly. It's uncomfortable for me. So I'm not going to do this task that I have set before me. It's similar to that, right? Like that's the only analogy that I can think of in terms of like what has happened in Afghanistan. It's like being so selfish that it's like, I went to this like huge mission of 20 years, poured billions into it, for my own, obviously, national security interests, whatever that means. But at the same time, at the last moment, knowing that something horrible is going to happen, I'm going to then orchestrate this power grab and give it to the Taliban just so I can relieve myself of some stress. And that has been what the foreign policy of the US has been. That's why I'm hearing a lot of like, Biden did a good job on both sides. And it's really disgusting to hear. It's just the grossest. But at the same, because it's like lack of humanity, lack of empathy, and the apathy is really real in this moment is what I'm noticing and what all Afghans are noticing. I think that's the larger conversation that's being had in a lot of different groups, whether it's on Clubhouse or like on Facebook groups or in, family chats and things like that. It's like, wow, not one single country like did something as each province was going to the Taliban. Nobody did anything. There was no pushback. And that's a moment that Afghans will forever remember. And that is also a moment for those who are in such desperate conditions will be radicalized around, and it will come back to bite America and the West in the ass. And that is always going to happen. And then of course it's going to spur another 60-year war next time, who knows? But it's like you're creating these situations, you're creating these monsters, you're doing it. And then, it's just frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for breaking all that down though. But yeah, so, as you've kind of been discussing off and on the whole time, the US and international community has, largely deliberately butchered this, entire situation for 40, 50 years. Going back from the proxy war with the Soviet Union, funding Mujahideen to begin with, launching the war, and then, kind of leaving so abruptly and creating this vacuum, allowing for that power grab. So, I guess my question would be, at this point, like, and this could be from your perspective or from other Afghans that you've talked to or heard from, what are some things that you would like to see from, whether it be from, the U.S. government or administration, other international organizations, other countries, as far as, some direct action taken in response to this crisis, whether that be immediate action, whether that be more of a long-term, strategy or course of action?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, because getting funds to the U.S. is from the U.S. to Afghanistan is necessary, but banks are closed. Western unions are, I don't think they're operating or functioning properly. So, I think first, like, being really aware, especially for the Afghan diaspora that's around you, maybe you live in communities that do have Afghan people, is to not talk about this issue unless you have done extensive research. It is incredibly triggering. It is incredibly painful. And people are just saying, go Biden, go this. Like, first off, don't do that. It's not supportive. It's not okay. Like, regardless of your opinions, if you have not done extensive research and do not understand where you're coming from, what you're talking about, don't talk about it. Just don't. I'd rather you not say anything. If you can't show solidarity and understanding and empathy, shut up. Just shut And then two, if you see, there's an organization that I know of that I will provide, information on. You guys can post it. I'm kind of interning for them now, and they provide aid to Afghans, and they do like month-long supplies of food. So, and what they're doing is they're taking in the money right now, and they're not spending it. They're saving it right now, waiting until things settle down, until Western unions open up, until life is settled in some way or another, and then they will be providing resources. If you are a lawyer, if you are anyone who knows Afghans and have any type of legal expertise, like assist people in applying for Civ and P2 applications, especially those who were translators who were working for nonprofits and things like that, because these people are being attacked. I'm actually working on a couple applications right now. People are being targeted for having worked or aided the US in any capacity. In fact, even if you, I think, know English, you're being targeted to an extent. So I think it's just kind of being aware, providing support to the organizations that you know are assisting people. The one that I know is, like I said, is FAMIDI. It's FAMIDI.com. If you go onto their website, you can see what they're doing, see what type of aid they have going on, and you can make donations. And like I said, they are a great organization. They're right now taking in funds, and they are very considerate. They're doing research before they are dispersing those funds. And they have connections on the ground. A lot of the GoFundMes, the issue is GoFundMe takes a while to disperse funds. And then in addition, it's other, so it's really difficult. And then three is just, if you have legal expertise, or if you have family, or if you have friends, or if you know anyone that can, it's F as in Frank, A-M as in Mary, I-D-I.com. Yep, FAMIDI.com. Thank you. But if you are able to donate to that, and if you're able to offer any type of assistance, because right now there are people, I'm sure you've seen, that are so desperate to get out. They're clinging on to a moving airplane, and they're dropping to their deaths. The desperation is so real, and I've seen people make fun of it. They think it's comical, but it's like, have you seen, like, what person would do that if the conditions were not that bad? That has to be understood as well, and if you don't have the humanity to understand that, then, well, that's that.
Yeah, and I know some of the reports were that, as the U.S. soldiers were leaving, they were actually using lethal measures to make sure that they were, able to leave. And so when we're talking about what does this look like now, but in 5, 10, 20 years, as Reverend Jeremiah Wright said, America's chickens always come home to roost, right? And these things were literally harming folks, right? We're people who we claim to be our allies, people we are claimed to love and work with alongside. As soon as these orders went out, people were just abandoned. And while it's this conversation about the abolition of the military industrial complex, you also have to understand that, like, change and peace for the future cannot always come at the subjugation and erasure of Black and brown people, particularly brown people in the global South. I think it's very important that people feel that there are things that they can do, like advocate, donate to these organizations. Also, call your elected officials. Some calls we've seen is for the Biden administration to waive application fees for Afghan refugees. We've seen calls to help and identify support to negotiate, if we're going to negotiate with the Taliban, to renegotiate to make sure that women and girls are safe and protected. There's a lot of things that people can do, in addition to checking in and supporting the Afghan people that
Yes. And a lot of the Taliban, some of their current policies, as I've known, is that if you join them, they will give you property because they're taking people's property, and they will give you a wife. And that of course is just vile. But that is actually attracting a lot of people from Pakistan to come into Afghanistan. So it's, once again, this takeover of this one nation over another nation. That has been the movement. That has been what's been going on, and this furthers, further confirms that's in fact what is happening. And this frustration that Afghans feel really stems from this fact that we have a foreign entity fully controlling our country. And that loss, that pain is something I will say I was actually shocked and surprised myself, because I grew up so American and I grew up here. I literally was born there and then came here, and like I have no recollection of anything really. But just that happening Sunday, spent the whole day crying, I was like numb because I was in so much stress. And I just couldn't, I was surprised by my own tears, to be honest, because I think like a lot of us, especially those from the diaspora, we had no idea what knowing the Afghans held Afghanistan meant to us and to our identity, and how much that meant to us. And then to know this foreign entity is now taken over. And so many lives and opportunities and futures are lost. What that means to us, when in many ways we are beyond privileged. We live here, we're completely safe. Many of us are citizens, and so we don't, it is truly remarkable, and really shows me, like, my mom was like, why are you crying? Stop crying. I was like, no, I need to feel this. I need to know this. I need to know it for my own humanity. I need to know that I'm still human, that I feel this, that I can feel this, and that I'm not apathetic, that this matters to me. It reconfirms that. And I think a lot of Afghans, we're really frustrated and we're really vulnerable right now. But at the same time, one thing I do know, and I've always known over the 50 years and the hundreds of years of war, is like, Afghans are the most resilient people I've ever met in my life. And I know that despite how horrifying all of this is, for us, we rise and we don't despair. There's actually a protest on the 28th in Washington, D.C. There have been a couple protests in the last few weeks. Afghans are still protesting outside of the Pakistan embassy, outside of the White House. They're protesting when Biden is giving speeches. They're there. They're making sure that their voices are heard, even if it's a small diaspora. It still matters to us. And I think that's been so reaffirming for me of the strength that we all have. So I'm very proud of Afghans for that. That's where I'm at. Any other questions?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. But I did want to ask, real quick as well. And this has been a really rapidly evolving situation. So it's, kind of changing pretty much constantly. But I just wanted to ask, if you had, any more updates as far as, people being able to get out of the country. I know I saw earlier, obviously there was, the Kabul airport had been closed down. People weren't able to get flights. I did see earlier that it had reopened in some capacity. So I was just wondering, if what the current situation is as far as people getting out of the country. If there's any sort of resources as far as them being able to get connected to organizations to help them get visas, get some sort of just access to being in another country. If you could talk about that a little bit.
So Canada has said that they will accept about 20,000 people. India is one of the only places that is still offering, or one of the only countries that's still offering their airlines to provide flights out. The US, at least from what I know, I'm not sure that everything changes moment by moment, so I'm not sure if that still stands. The US obviously has shut down everything. France, I read somewhere, has reopened its consulate or its embassy there somehow, and is processing applications. The US P2 application process is wildly difficult because it is asking for people to be in a third country in order to then come here. And these are P2s are people who have directly worked with the US. How difficult is that process? And apparently that's a Trump era policy, but still that's something that's being discussed in terms of being rid of, like through Congress. But I just think it's wild that even exists, because it's like, how wealthy do you have to be to first get out of the country and then apply to come to the US? Like all of that. In addition, a lot of it, the applications are asking for, proof of connection to the US, like whether it's whether it's pay stubs, things like that, and to be in contact with the head supervisor of the organization or the place that you were working with. And it's just like, people don't have access to phones, they don't have access to internet, they don't have access to anything. How do you expect them to contact these people, then get all of this paperwork together and then come in? And that's like their vetting process, right? And that's been so wrong that has been the vetting process, because it's just like, you're expecting so much out of the people who have nothing and have been fleeing their homes and don't have access to so much. And that's what you need in order to vet. And it's like, wouldn't it be better for the lives, so that they're not dying, that you vet when they're here as opposed to vetting before? And also, it's like, the conditions are so bad in Afghanistan. Every single person deserves to, like, there shouldn't even be any vetting, really. Like, every single, you created something horrible and these people are dying, and every single person should be afforded the opportunity to escape that. Because at this point, like I said, it's a foreign entity that's controlling the country. People don't feel, it's not, they've lost their homes. It's, what are they going back to? At the very least, they need peace and security. And so, like I said, Air India is the only place that I can think of that is still offering flights. Many countries are offering for people to apply and for people to apply for asylum, but at the same time, the application process is so difficult. It's also in various languages. Like the P21 here is like mainly in English. There's a couple Dari versions, but even then, like, much of the country is unfortunately, they don't speak Dari even. They're not properly educated. So there's just so many barriers consistently for them to even have the means or the ability to, much less the means, obviously. You need a lot of means to travel and do anything. That's also to consider, but they're not able to leave. So many people are so desperate that, as you saw, are clinging onto airplanes because they don't know how else to get out.
Thank you for that. And we posted the Famidi, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
We posted the link. We're having this conversation next Monday. That we have some more people who are going to be continuing this conversation. So this is not something that, this is not a one-off topic that we're having. We are very invested in using our platform, whatever we mean to support. So please reach out. I'm glad you're safe and you're support, but you're all, once one hood family, you're always part of our family. And we love you and we thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I love you guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate the support. Thanks, fine. Bye, guys.
And no matter what happens in the world, there's so much that goes on, but it's always home to us. There are Afghan refugees and resettled folks here in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. There are, survivors from all type of conflicts, here in this region. And so we also have to be mindful that whatever happens abroad, we feel it at home, and we do have to have empathy. We do have to, always stay motivated and to share and to demand our elected, officials do more based on the policies that they put in place, right? And so again, we want to thank Sadaf so much for coming on. And as we wrap and close, we want to remind people there's a lot going on with COVID-19. Please wear your mask, wash your hands. As we mentioned at the top of the hour, there is an election coming up in November. You do have until October to register to vote. If you've changed your name, if you've moved, if you're new to the area, please make sure you are registered to vote. We'll have some more conversations, this Thursday at 7 p.m. I will be hosting Ask a Black Doctor, our One Hood's founder is traveling to Syria. He usually hosts these events, so he's going to be I'm out of town, so I will be filling in his shoes, talking about this new Delta variant. What does it mean for schools reopening? At least 6 schools have opened and closed because of the Delta variant. So if we're not going on another lockdown, what is it going to mean if parents have to basically take care of their children while also being forced to return to work? What are the opportunities, for support? What does that mean for the spread if we cannot, contain it and we do force, this mass opening of schools? So we'll talk about that on Thursday. On Wednesday, we do have This Week in White Supremacy. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff to talk about there. And Thursday afternoon, for mental health, we do have, On Tilt with Mama Brown and Julius Boatwright. Special, recognition is Still Smiling for, getting those grants and the work they're doing, like for mental health. And then, with that, we talk a lot about school today. Ryan, our co-host, he started law school today. And so how was that experience? Are you excited? I'm very excited for you.
It was good. Yeah. So I have my first day of orientation today. So that, that'll be continuing throughout the week. So still getting in the swing of things. I just moved up here last weekend. So, still getting used to that too, from Pittsburgh, the suburb with skyscrapers, to Manhattan all of a sudden. But yeah, no, it went well so far. Met some people, got some information from, the dean and other people who spoke. So, still kind of navigating through it. But yeah, I'm excited. Thank you.
All right. I know we have a little bit of a message to play for our viewers before we wrap, and then we will head out. Again, said, remember to please register to vote. Again, stay involved with the community. I know it's a lot, but there's always something that you can do. There's always an action, and then we'll play the clip before we wrap.
Again, thank you to all of our guests for joining us tonight. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and for your continued support of One Hood Power. Thank you.
Surprise! But again, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Best luck, and if you want to close us out, you can.
Absolutely. Thanks, Miracle. Thank you to everybody else at One Hood Power, One Hood. Thank you, John, for putting this together. Our guests tonight, all our guests from all the previous shows. Everybody who's been tuning into the shows, supporting One Hood in various capacities. Helped us to build our platform over the past, couple years, especially. But even several years before that, and before Miracle and I were even there in the first place. But yeah, just, I really enjoyed, my time here. I'm, looking forward to doing more stuff with y'all in the future. I'll still be working with Farouk and everybody else on music, obviously. And, I'm in New York right now, but that doesn't mean I'll never be back in Pittsburgh. So
yes, and
I'll be around for sure.
Listen, we'll be doing pop-up shows and stuff with Ryan. Do not worry, he is not going away. Hopefully.
Y'all not getting rid of me that easy.
You're some way. But with that, thank you all so much for tuning into the One Hood Power Hour. We hope you tune into the rest of the shows for the One Hood Media Network. And with that, we'll sign off.
And visit onehoodpower.org, donate, all that good stuff. Check out the other shows. Thanks, y'all.